right off the bat. There's Lyle Thompson.
Courier, Bogan.
Kylie Ohlmiller showing off those shifty skills.
Schreiber driving hard down the alley, and he scores.
What a goal from Josh Byrne.
Kayla Trainer
Slips and scores.
Are you kidding me? By Dylan Ward. Gets topside wrap. Oh, scores!
Welcome to Pro Lacrosse Talk, your go-to podcast for interviews with professional players, coaches, and executives, as well as the latest news and analysis from all three professional lacrosse leagues. Now, here's your host, Hutton Jackson.
What's up, Pro Lacrosse fans? Welcome to another edition of Pro Lacrosse Talk presented by Fanatics. I'm your host, Hutton Jackson, and today I'm joined by PLT contributor Brian Andrews, as well as Joe Keegan and Jake Watts of the PLL, and we are talking all things PLL College Draft. It's less than a week away, actually, as the time of this recording, so we are getting really, really close. But before we kind of dive into the draft, we do have some other news from the PLL. They have an app that has just recently released, and I'm going to download it immediately after this recording because apparently it's now available on Android as well, but it was released on iOS a couple weeks earlier, and I know you guys are excited about the app and kind of to talk about it. One thing I'm really excited about is fantasy, but I'll let you talk a little bit about it, Jake. Any thoughts on this app that just released, what people should expect if they haven't downloaded it already?
Yeah, super excited about our new app that we just launched, completely owned and operated, built in-house, which allows us to be very customizable moving forward and create experiences for the fans that they've been asking for. Really just a one-stop shop for everything PLL, from tickets to merchandise to academy to stats. Anything you need can be right at your fingertips and on the home screen of your now iPhone and Android devices. Like you mentioned, one new addition this year, we will be launching a weekly fantasy game. We are calling it Player Royale. We are very excited to release this to the public. We think it's going to be a great way for fans to get to know players more, be engaged with every single one of our games. We went with the weekly fantasy aspect this year to build out the concept, and maybe in future years we can look into season-long formats. But this year you'll be picking 5 positions or 5 players in 5 different positions weekly, based off a tiered-like system, similar to DraftKings, salary cap, and things like that. Instead of money, we're using tiers. This is to foster some strategic thinking and promote more diversity in roster selection. So week to week, those tiers will change based off player performance. Super excited to roll this out, and I think the fans are going to love it.
No, of course, I'm a fantasy fiend, so I'm certainly looking forward to it. I've enjoyed playing IL's fantasy game, and I like doing that. You guys are doing the weekly because they'll allow people to drop in, if they maybe missed the boat the first couple of weeks, or maybe they miss a few weeks. I know I've missed a few for IL, so it's nice, I think, to give people the option to play full season long, as well as hop in when they, are available to do so. Certainly looking forward to that. Any other details with this app, Joe, that you kind of want to bring to, potential listeners' attention if they haven't already downloaded it yet?
Yeah, I think one of the cool things is that you can follow your favorite team like never before, right? One of the first things once you download the app is your ability to select your favorite team and then stay up to date with everything that happens, right? Whether it's, your favorite team facing off, like that's personally for me, that's how I stay in the loop with the Celtics, throughout the season. I'm not checking the schedule every single morning, but I'll get that push notification when the game starts, push notification when there's a big Jaylen Brown dunk or when there's a trade, right? And that stuff just like finding its way to my lock screen. I want that type of information, like right there, like right on my watch. I don't want to have to go like searching for it, open up Safari and like one of my 40 tabs, have like a stats tab here or, Celtics schedule there. So being able to follow your favorite team, or just a league if you don't have a favorite team, but being able to like select that and get that information that's tailored to you is one of the things that I'm most excited about.
No, definitely. And I think too, with, injury news, player movement, it's important for any fan to have. And, if anyone's sports bettors as well, I think that's big for them too, to kind of stay up on that news. So that way you can kind of react before the line moves. So betting side of things as well, I think it's great. But if you're following a favorite team, your team's about to add a few more players. This draft is coming up. It's going to be on ESPNU at 8 p.m. Eastern on May 10th. Looking forward to that. You'll have Clark and Boyle on as analysts, and Chris Cotter as the host of this draft. So certainly looking forward to it. It's almost here. So let's kind of dive right in. I'll start with you, Brian. We're going to start, kind of going pick by pick just in terms of teams, but we're more focusing on what teams needs are necessarily and kind of what their targets could be. It's not going to be a full mock. But I think most of us, if not all of us, are in agreement that Chris Gray will be the number 1 pick, the leading point scorer in NCAA lacrosse with 401 points now after that game against Duke past week. Brian, I'll start with you. What were your thoughts on this addition of Chris Gray to the Chrome if they do take him number 1 overall? And then what are some other needs do you think that they could address later rounds?
Yeah, I'm not going to waste any breath really arguing against a great pick or thinking someone could fill the role better. But especially with the announcement of like Jordan Wolf retiring, I feel like that's just a clear-cut selection. He'll fit great anywhere. I think he's a really flexible player. But the Chrome are really interesting in general because obviously their whole team basically retired, so they have a lot of needs to fill. And I think one of the places that they had one of their biggest losses was actually at the long stick midi position. And I think a really great candidate for them in the second round is Kobe Smith to fill the void of Joel White, who was a huge assist for them on face-off wings, which I think they need massive shoes to fill. Eli Salama could definitely fill those shoes, but I think having options for them would be really great. The Chrome also aren't really as great in transition historically, and with all of the people that they're losing, it's something they really, I think, need to focus on and something that gives a lot of teams big advantages in this league. And for them to really compete, they're going to need to keep up with that. And I think Kobe Smith could really help them improve from being 5th in transition opportunities and 5th in face-off percentage with some additional wing ground balls. So I think they're going to target Kobe Smith or an available LSM at that position, which I think might catch some people off guard as there are some high-profile names coming out of this draft.
No, absolutely. I think Kobe Smith would be a great pick for them. It'll be interesting to see if he goes in the first round. I feel like he's getting a lot of love recently, but for he's one of the polls that I could see kind of going, maybe later in the second or as early as, late in the first. So definitely interesting. I don't hate that at all. I personally think, they could also add some offensive firepower, whether it be another attackman like an Asher Nolting, if he's available on that lefty side. I know they have Brendan Cavanaugh that's going to fill that void, and Cole Williams they picked up as well. But after that Gutterding trade, they kind of had a vacancy now on that left side. So that's kind of why I like maybe Asher at if he's available, then I think he will be in the second round. Jack Hanna's another guy that's pretty versatile. I think would help that young midfield core that lost Ned Crotty this offseason as well. Joe, your thoughts on the Chrome? Obviously, we talk about Chris Gray going number 1 overall, but what are some other needs that you think they have or targets that they might target in these later rounds?
Yeah, I think it's likely that Chris Gray is going to go number 1. Like you said, that's their biggest need to get that go-to initiator. Brian hit the nail on the head. They need an LSM. I'm not too sure that Kobe Smith will be there for their second pick, but we can get to that in a minute. I think their other need is a lefty, like you said. That's a hole that they had when Gutterding got traded. It's a hole they had when Gutterding was on the roster. Justin Gutterding wasn't shooting the ball well. So they needed to address that position for some time now. And obviously the best fit in this draft at that position is Logan Wisnauskas, who's really more in the conversation for the number 1 overall pick than he is for number 9. So if they don't take Logan Wisnauskas number 1 overall, are they going to get another chance at him? Do they have the ability to trade back into the first round like we saw so many teams do in the NFL draft, right? Identifying the guys that they liked and trading in to get them. Not so sure there, but I think that finding a lefty, whether it's Wisnauskas or someone, a steal in one of the later rounds, there's plenty of super senior goal scorers at that lefty position who could crack this roster. Finding a lefty and an LSM, and then you touched on it a little bit, but potentially a goalie in a deep goalie class. I would put that as probably their 4th need. But if they can come out of this draft with a go-to initiator, a lefty, an LSM, and another goalie, I think that's a win for Chrome.
No, definitely. And I'm of the belief that Scanoni is their guy, but certainly there's a lot of goalies coming out. Wouldn't be, bad to add another one, have some competition between Scanoni and Washuta heading into training camp. Jake, what are your thoughts on the Chrome? Anything that we haven't hit on that you kind of want to touch on?
Not too much to color in. I think if there were betting odds on Chris Gray to go number one, he'd probably be minus 150 minimum. That's like how much of a need they have at that position. Need a quarterback on the offensive end. But honestly, this is a team with the most needs to fill. You can pick any position and they could probably upgrade at. A lot of it was colored in by you guys, but really, hopefully they can maybe wait off and get lucky with Whipsnakes in the second round, but I just don't see that happening.
No, definitely. And, last year, the Atlas had the top pick in the draft. More discussion last year, I think, between Sowers and Teat. But, Matt Moore is right there as well in the discussion with Chris Gray as these top prospects in this draft. We'll go back to you, Jake, with the Atlas. Where do you think the Atlas kind of go in this draft? They have 2 picks in the first round, so they can select somebody at second and then get somebody at 5th as well. Is Matt Moore their guy at number 2, or do you see them, going in a different direction?
If Matt Moore is there at 2, I think they take him for sure. They could use an upgrade at the midfield position. Their midfield didn't perform as well as it could have last year. I think we saw that in the quarterfinal game against the Chaos, scoring less than 10 points in that game. Found some areas where they could improve on for sure. Matt Moore, pretty malleable player, can play a lot of positions, and that's needed in a 1-4-1, right? It's like he can play that wing. He can play that top dodging midfielder or slide into that crease area if needed. So if Moore is available at 2, that's a lock.
And what about you, Brian? What are your thoughts on maybe not necessarily number 2, but number 5? I think it gets a little bit more interesting. What are some guys you think they could take at number 5 if Matt Moore is number 2?
Quickly on Moore, I think Jake hit the nail on the head, describing how he could kind of meld to fit whatever the existing flow of the Atlas team is, because that's something that the Atlas team has struggled with in the 19 and 20 seasons, where they've been really loaded with offensive talent, but it didn't always fit quite well. They don't really have to worry about that as much, in my opinion, and Jake's opinion, with that pick. So I feel like that's a pretty big lock. At 5, though, I've seen multiple, actually all the drafts that I've seen have had Kobe going to the Atlas at 5, which I don't really see the argument for it. And quickly, I'll just kind of counter it. The Atlas are already number 2 in fast break possessions, which Kobe would be a pick to increase some, transition frequency or opportunities. Chick has been awesome on the defensive end and up on the faceoff wing, and they also have Logan, and Chick and Logan on the faceoff wings combined are better than most of the faceoff units in the league in terms of getting the ball to the offensive side of the field. And even when Chick's not on the field, they have Pless and Newbold, who I don't understand how you can't be happy with that setup as the Atlas. And if I'm picking Kobe, I'm going to want him up top just based on his play style. I don't think he's going to be the person you want bringing in as maybe Tucker Durkin is going out. He's, only signed through the 22 season. He's kind of going to be a sooner rather than later need to fill for them. So for that reason, I think they're going to try to go after a close defenseman at 5. And that can be heavily influenced by the 3 and 4 picks for the Woods and Archers, depending on which position they decide to go for. But if Arden Cohen's there, I say they take him. But I think they're going to focus on a close defenseman at 5 is my point.
Yeah, I think Kobe Smith can play close defense. We saw him match up one-on-one pretty damn well with Pat Spencer in 2019 down low. He has plenty of experience covering behind the cage. And in this league, we've seen close defensemen run, most notably Jared Newman back in 2019, but he played close defense that entire year and sparked plenty of transition. So if you put Kobe Smith down at close, up at pole, I think he's an upgrade for them at pole, and I think he has enough versatility that he could play close. In his decision making, I don't know that there's a better passing pole in college lacrosse right now. With all of the picks that Atlas has, I don't think that they have a ton of needs right now, just based on how well they performed last year. If they can get two of the best players available in Matt Moore and Kobe Smith, then those 2 and 5 picks would be huge.
And to note, Coach Rubio does have some history with Kobe Smith as well. He coached him a little bit, so there is some history there prior. I think the other reason too why, if the Atlas don't grab him at number 5, the Chaos are going to grab him, I think, with one of those 2 picks, because they have a need at pole as well. And he's their type of guy, I feel like, that can get up and down the field, push and transition. So unfortunately, I don't know how well that works for, Chrome getting him, but I definitely think his stock is rising, as you guys said. And we mentioned Cohen a little with the Redwoods. So let's go over to the Redwoods. Brian, do you think they go with Cohen at 3, or do you think they maybe look in a different direction, offensive side of the ball? It's, for me, I like Cohen here, not just because he's a Notre Dame guy, but I just think he's the best pole available, close defender. And I think he would be an upgrade over Finn Sullivan, not to take anything away from Finn Sullivan and that Redwoods defense that's been stout even in the absence of Matt Landis. But what are your thoughts on what the Redwoods do at number 3?
I'm really torn for the Redwoods between probably Cohen, because he'll still be there presumably, and Montgomery. I think that, adding some depth to their midfield and a guy that I think personally would fit into their offensive scheme, which is very ISO dodging heavy. I think he'd fit in really well there and would be able to beat his matchups. And I think that would really assist the Redwoods offense. So I don't have a good grasp, but those are the 2 things that I think that we'll be looking for in the first 2 rounds for the Redwoods, is either a defensive or a midfield, and which side they choose first, I feel like could be a coin flip. Maybe I'd give Cohen better odds of going first though.
And Jake, what are your thoughts on at number 3? I know you're eyeing a guy that, is getting talked about in the first round, but maybe not as high as 3 by most people. What are your thoughts on what the Redwoods do at number 3?
I think Cohen is a natural fit there. Could use an upgrade at the pole position, but one guy I'm really looking at for the Redwoods based off just strictly need is Jonathan Donville. I think I've been super impressed with his play this season, especially off ball. Just vividly remember the Virginia game where he had 3 kind of good spacing off ball goals. That is a huge need for the Redwoods. When we think back to all the playoff games and close game situations that they get stagnant within the last 2 minutes of the game, because they have a lot of Dodgers that end up being right on top of each other. And they don't have that guy who is able to fill those vacant spots for where Sergio and Miles are dodging off of. And so I think about that position of Miles dodging down the right side, rolling back, hitting Donville on the high crease area for a off ball goal. So maybe high for 3, but they don't have another chance at him until round 3. And I don't think Donville falls to round 3. So it's if you really are trying to fill a need like that, you would maybe going a little high at 3 here for him. But so Cohen and Donville are 2 guys I would look at for the Redwoods for sure.
No, absolutely. I like that a lot. He was the number 1 pick in the NLL draft last year. He'll play with Panther City. And I think, he's getting a lot of love for the first round, but maybe not as high as 3. And I think he made a good case for why, we could see him go as high as 3. Joe, what are your thoughts kind of on what the Redwoods do?
Yeah, I think this is really the first domino to fall. We talked about Gray going number 1, Matt Moore going number 2. This is the pick that I could see going in a few different directions. Most likely Arden Cohen to slide into that defense and really take some of those number 1 matchups to free up Eddie Glazner and Garrett Epple. But if not Arden Cohen, I think Logan Wisnauskas at this point would be the best player available. You can make the case that Logan Wisnauskas is the best overall player in the draft. Mm-hmm. He might win the Tewaaraton. You have to consider him at number 3. I think it's tough with Matt Kavanaugh, Ryder Garnsey, Charlie Bertrand on that lefty side. But Nat St. Laurent has never shied away from adding an offensive toy and making it work. A lot of people doubted that he could make it work, bringing in Rob Pennell and bringing back Jules Henningberg in 2021, and they had the league's best settled offense. So maybe they add another weapon there, or maybe to Brian's point, they add Nakai Montgomery and maybe they deploy Nakai in a role, and maybe Sergio Perkovic gets back to a role, right? With Nakai in the mix, they would have so much midfield depth that maybe they have some of those guys in a flex midi role to really give themselves that spark and transition that they've lacked really since 2019. I think they came out of the gates flying in the first season and got a reputation for being a team that runs. It's really not the case. They might be the most settled 6-on-6 team on both ends in the league. They don't run off TDs, wins. I think they could put Perkovic on the wings more for TD to create some early offense. But last year, they scored less than a goal per game on fast breaks, by far the lowest in the league. Some teams are tripling them up on fast breaks. So to Jake's point earlier about them stalling later in games, I think they probably need to get some of those easier goals earlier in the games by having better athletes on the field and better playmakers moving from defense to offense. So you have to consider Nakai there, just like you have to consider Wisnowskis and Arden Cohen. And whatever this decision ends up being, whether it's one of those three, whether it's someone else, whether it's a trade, is really going to dictate the tempo for the rest of the draft.
No, absolutely. And I think it directly, affects the Archers, who really, their strongest needs are maybe guys that they're not going to get in that first round because it'd be a reach. And I feel like at this point, they'll probably take the best player available at that 4th spot. They have a need at face-off. I think that's well documented. They're bringing in Tyrell Hammer-Jackson after trading away Stephen Kelly this offseason. So obviously, they have that. They have Connor Gaffney as well. I don't think those two are long-term fits for them. We'll see. Maybe they'll impress this offseason or this season. But I think that's definitely neat. And, filling in the void of Drew Adams and goalie as well. But again, I don't think we'll see them address those needs in the first round. Brian, where do you think they go with this number 4 pick? Do you think they take, whoever the best offensive player is available after, those guys go, or maybe even Cohen too, a defensive player, even though their defense was one of the best in the league, it wouldn't hurt. What are your thoughts kind of on what the Archers do here at number 4?
Yeah, this one is probably the most confusing. It could go the most ways as the dominoes are falling. I do think, well, one, they have to also address the Jackson Place retirement because now they're lacking some depth down low. I don't think they go after a goalie first round. I think the two things that are most likely to happen are also a defender or a midfielder, not to be a broken record. And they could go for Nakai Montgomery, or I think a cheekier pick for them would be Donville. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that the Archers are kind of, I don't know if it's surprising or not, but the 3rd most efficient 2-man game offense in the league, but they don't really have many 2-man game initiations, not as many as other teams, but they're really efficient. And I think adding a guy like Donville could increase the versatility of that offense, get them more opportunities in their most efficient offensive set and really help them. And I think that would kind of, if Donville falls down to here, I think that could be like a steal away from the chaos, taking a guy away that could really just automatically fit into their system for a lot of really obvious reasons. So like they could go a lot of ways, but I think that's my funnest pick for them. But I think it's probably midfield or defense first. And even though there's a giant hole to fill at face-off, I think you could wait till the second round to try to address that need.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And yeah, I think, they're going to kind of have a good opportunity to get an impact player, even though this team, like we said, is pretty well set other than the 2 positions that we mentioned. Jake, with the assumption that Donville is taken at 3, who do you like the Archers taking at number 4?
I really like Nakai at this spot. Last year, the formula to beat the Archers was slow to go. And to me, that's because anybody outside of Grant and Tom Schreiber was having difficulty winning their matchups, right? It's like you need guys who can get a step or two on their individual matchups to get the defense to start rotating so you can get the ball to those off-ball shooters like Marcus Holmans and Will Manny's of the world and not really rely strictly on Tom Schreiber to beat his matchup from up top. And so it's like you get a guy in Nakai Montgomery who can probably win his matchup against anybody in the league. And so he's creating a slide automatically from the box. And so that's a guy that I look to potentially add to that team. A lot of athleticism, can get back on defense. I think Joe mentioned earlier, the Redwoods are strictly 6-on-6. That's kind of similar to the Archers as well, right? They get their 6 guys on, and then get their short stick defensive midfielders on, but he's a guy that can sink back into that defense, create transition for an offensive possession. if it was a turnover on the other end. But if Nakai's there at 4, they have a pick of the litter here, but he would be a great addition to that team just because of his athleticism, his ability to beat matchups, which was sorely needed last year.
Jake hit on it, that slow to go defenses really took it to this Archers offense. Not just last year, but for the past couple of years, we've seen Chaos knock out the Archers with that defensive strategy. I wouldn't be surprised to see them add an offensive weapon. I think they probably thought that Connor Fields was going to be that guy in those matchups that would take a short stick matchup and win it regularly. I'm not quite sure that he was to the degree that he was in 2019 for Chaos. So I think that whether it's Logan Wisnauskas or Brendan Nickturn here, I like Nickturn as a two-handed guy who gives the Archers something a little bit different than what they have in Trey Leclerc or Ryan Ambler, right? Who are both probably one-handed guys who are better off the redodge opportunity. I think that bringing in a guy like Brendan Nickturn could really be a spark for this offense. And then look, for the Archers, the goal is to get past Chaos and to finally win this championship. And I think that they can do that with Adam Gittleman engaged. I think that they need another piece on offense, and really the piece on offense and the face-off position are the only question marks. Just not sure that they can answer face-off position in this draft. If they could, they would at 4, but they might not even be able to answer it at 12. There might not be anybody worth taking there. So we'll see when they get their guy. I'm sure they'll draft a face-off guy, how he translates to the PLL rules. But there's no TD Erlin in this class. So it's going to be tough. They might be waiting another year to try to get Mike Sisselberger.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Nickturn because I feel like he's been one of the best players of the college season so far, but due to his military, potential military commitments, maybe not getting as much talk about him. But, we see a Johnny Surdick come in and played quality minutes his first year, and then obviously was a huge part of that team last year. So I think we've seen that. Obviously, it depends on the individual, but service academy grads can still make an impact in pro lacrosse pretty early on and for a long time as well. So I'm glad you mentioned Nickturn as well as Wisnauskas, because I think those are two guys maybe the Chaos target, although they also need a guy at pole. So let's kind of move to them here at number 6. They have a pick at 6 and 8. So pretty much whoever they take at 6, they want to, keep them away from the Whipsnakes potentially, which, maybe that is Wisnauskas. Also, they have that pick at 8 as well. So other than the Whips, they don't really have to worry. It's almost, they're close to getting back-to-back picks there. I'll flip it back to you, Jake. What do you think the Chaos kind of do in this draft? We mentioned that they need a poll, but do you think they take a poll at number 6 or number 8? Or do you think, if Cohen's already off the board or Kobe Smith's already off the board, that they might look elsewhere?
Man, it must be nice to be defending champs to get 2 picks in the first round. Pick of the litter here at 6. I think they go Roman Puglisi here. You can't keep playing this game where you expect Blaze to make 20 saves a game. And initiation starts from the midfield. Every single offense is predicated on attacking the short stick defensive midfielders. That's a position that could use an upgrade for them. You're able to get a guy who can win that matchup, not create slides. That's less shots on the MVP of the league. And so I think that's a lock there for them at 6. And one, to your point of potentially stealing that away from the Whipsnakes as well. Yes, they have Ty Warner back. Will he be the same player? Tough to tell. We'll see. But the rest of their guys, Hayes, freshly new, didn't make too much of a mark last year. And the other 2 guys are pretty long in the tooth, 35 for Matt Abbott and 32 for Jake Bernhardt, right? And short stick defensive midfield is a young man's game. You've got to be on top of your athleticism, your conditioning to be able to stay in front of these top tier athletes. And so that's a position I could definitely see them taking at 7. So Chaos taking Roman at 6 would prevent him going to the Whips, or they have proven in the past to place an emphasis on defense. So that's who I would go there at 6, and then probably take the best available pull there at 8, whether that's Kobe or potentially Arden, wherever the chips fell before that.
No, definitely. And Joe, what are your thoughts? Are you kind of in agreement? And if let's say Kobe and Cohen are off the board, time when 6 and 8 rolls around, who do you think is the next best poll available for this chaos team?
Yeah, I think Jake's right that adding a D midi here is an obvious need for the Whips too. So something that I could see Chaos doing at 6. If you look at the Chaos's best defensive performances, they've had somewhere to kind of hide their D middies, right? They triple pulled Atlas in the semifinals, hid their D middies on Eric Law, on Jake Caraway, against the Archers, right? There were 2 off-ball guys where they could hide those D middies. When we've seen this defense struggle and let up all those shots that Blaze sees, to Jake's point, is against teams that have 6 guys who can run by you, the Waterdogs, the Redwoods, those types of teams. So all credit to the champs. They won it in 2021. They probably had like a good matchup of offenses to go against based on their defensive strengths. But I think they do need a better D midi in this mix for some of those tougher matchups. As in terms of polls, it's tough. I think that I do think that Arden Cohen and Kobe Smith are going to go in those top 2. So whoever Chaos goes with is probably, it's probably not going to be necessarily the consensus top poll available, but it's going to be the top poll that fits their scheme, the top poll that can really play one-on-one on an island, that Army style of defense that obviously Johnny Surdick fit in with so well, but they're not going to bring in a guy who's like a help defender or who's going to need help. They're going to bring in somebody who can hold their own. So Kark had Brett Kennedy and his mock fall in there. I could see that. He definitely has that versatility between pole and close defense. But if Kobe Smith and Arden Cohen are gone, I think there's a drop off after those couple polls in this class.
No, I definitely agree with that. And Brian, kind of your thoughts. Obviously, we mentioned that they need some defensive help, but if those 2 guys are unavailable, do you think they, go short stick defensive midi defender, or do you think they maybe take an offensive guy?
I really like the point about the short 6 D mid and how they've like strategized around that, especially against the Atlas, which was a heartbreaker for me personally. But yeah, I agree that they go for like a pull at 8th. They're in a great spot that they can do that, because I'd feel pretty confident that the Whips maybe don't do that with their 7th pick. Kind of a different perspective maybe for the 6th pick, which I don't think is really likely, but I think it would be really interesting for them, is something that they have struggled with, is that the faceoff backs, and particularly with their wings. And I think adding a kind of like not a 2-way midi, but kind of like a Costabile type, athletic, get up and down the field, can go back if they need to, type of midfielder. That would be really helpful for them at the stripe. And also it would help them reduce the amount of goals they let up in transition, because they are 6 in D efficiency in transition. And that could be a place that could really help them. Do I see them going there at 6? Maybe not. I think I like the short stick defensive midfielder pick better, but like a pick like Jack Hanna or something could be like a really interesting pick, maybe later in the draft even.
Yeah, I like that Jack Hanna pick because I'm pretty high on him. But not first rounder material. I don't think, maybe, unless they take, Chaos take him 8th. I like the Chrome maybe to take him at 9. Even that might be a little bit high though. But I do agree with you in terms of, I think Hanna is a guy to definitely keep on someone's radar. I feel like he's going to be a steal depending on where he ends up, just because I don't see him, going in the first round. We mentioned Wisnauskas and Nick Turn kind of dropping, and if we're talking about those guys dropping in the first round, that doesn't create a lot of room for some of these other offensive guys that are up there. But moving on now to the Whipsnakes, a lot of the trendy pick is Wisnauskas to the Whipsnakes, and it's definitely possible that it happens. I think he might go earlier than that, but let's assume that he doesn't fall to 7 to the Whipsnakes. Where do the Whips kind of go here, Joe? Do you think they take an offensive guy? Do you think they add some pole depth? If Roman Puglisi is off the board, who do you think they kind of target in that short stick defensive midi role potentially?
If Puglisi and Wisnauskas are off the board, they probably should be. But
that probably means Donville or Montgomery are probably available too, though. So the Whipsnakes are kind of in a good spot that if two of those top candidates are off the board, they're probably getting a good guy regardless, though, right?
Totally. Yeah. With all the names that we've mentioned, if those two guys are gone, then somebody who we've been talking more about is going to be there for the Whips. I do think Wisnauskas will definitely be gone by 7. If he's not, then I think he's the pick. We've seen him play off Jared Bernhardt. We've seen him wear number 1. You can plug him into your offense. You just have to take him from a best player available standpoint at 7 if he falls there. But if he doesn't, I do think that they do need to get more athletic and younger at D-midi. They need to get better at offensive and defensive mid. But I think we'll see a huge year from Connor Kirst, who spent all last spring playing attack at Rutgers and then all last summer trying to adjust to play midfield in the pros, which is the single toughest position to make the jump from college to pros is midfield, offensive midfield. So Connor Kirst, Chris Islanian, a couple of those guys will get a better chance this year to take over, take the torch from Mike Janachuk and John Haas. Obviously, Brad Smith is one of the best in the world at that position. So I do think they probably have more depth there than their depth going into 2022 is above where their performance was in 2021. So I think D-mid, even with Tyler Warner back, the guy takes 10 biology classes at a time right now. I'm sure he's super competitive. So he's going to come into camp in great shape. But the fact of the matter is last year they needed 2 D-mids, right? So even if Tyler Warner is at his 2020 hard hat D-mid of the year level, he's not 2 D-mids. So Roman Puglisi for me is the pick. And yeah, if Wisnauskas and Puglisi are both picked, then the Whips are going to be in pretty good shape. They're going to have their pick of some great players.
No, definitely. And I'm glad you mentioned Kirst too, because like we said, midfield is tough to crack into. He's been playing defense with the Swarm in the NLL. I think that's going to benefit his game coming in the summer. He'll be in good shape. So that we could see a jump from him. And I've been high on Chris Islanian, who can kind of play both, righty and lefty too. He's versatile. So the Whips are going to be in good shape, I think. Maybe let's look at some later rounds too for the Whips. Is Bubba Fairman another Maryland guy that maybe you think they could target in later rounds? We don't think he's going to be a first rounder, but let's say Puglisi's not there. Do you think he would be a good impact player that the Whips could draft, Joe, if he's in available later rounds?
I think it'd be a good impact player for anybody to target. I think that his a lot of the things that coaches evaluate are the soft skills, right? Everybody has like the stick skills or the athleticism to translate to the next level, but the soft skills of like what type of locker room guy are you? I think Bubba Fairman's switch to D-mid, not just going into this year, but after injuries, in February, right? He didn't spend all fall ball playing D-mid. He made the jump because it was the best for the team. The team hasn't missed a beat. So anytime you can add a guy like that to your locker room with the versatility and the willingness to be versatile is going to be really impactful. And that's probably the guy who can make an impact from day one. We saw it with Ryan Terefenko and Danny Logan, who were 2nd-round picks last year. Probably should have been top 5 picks if we're being honest and going back and redrafting. Maybe top 6. Last year's class was loaded, but they should have been 1st-round picks, right? So you look at Fairman, I think there's no team that shouldn't have him on their boards, right? Everybody should be considering him.
No, absolutely. And 2 teams we haven't talked about because they don't have a pick in the 1st round are the Waterdogs and the Cannons. Cannons chose to make a lot of moves this offseason. Waterdogs kind of did that the offseason prior, and it paid off for them. I'll go to you, Brian. Where do you think the Waterdogs kind of target in this draft? No really big needs other than maybe some depth adds, I think, at LSM or face-off. But, kind of where do you think the Waterdogs target? Maybe more of a position group that you think they're going to target instead of a player that they're going to target.
I think LSM is like a good point. Just give Reese, a dedicated backup. We've seen teams with multiple LSMs that they're able to rotate through have that benefit them. Not everyone needs it, I guess. But even the Whips could add that. So I think both teams could be in the running in later rounds for like a Ryan McNulty or something. I think which would help both of them. With Withers, like really scrappy face-off style, maybe bring in a young guy to back him up at the stripe, just as a depth add or something. But like you said, I don't think there's a lot of desperate holes that they need to fill. So it's a good thing that they're not drafted until the second round.
Mm-hmm. And, maybe they take a flyer on Ignacio, another Buckeye at the face-off stripe. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Jake, on the Waterdogs? Obviously they're pretty set heading into this season, but MGM has them as the favorites. I think they're the third favorites odds-wise on DraftKings. But what are your thoughts on the Waterdogs and what they do in this draft?
I think they could probably address the midfield position, lose a guy like Drew Snyder this year. Potentially could see a guy like Jack Hanna falling to them at pick number 6 in the second round. I think if he's there, you take him. And then the guy we just talked about, Bubba Fairman, probably fits the Waterdog mold perfectly. A two-way guy who can play both offense and defense. We know that Coach loves those types of players, keeping them on the field. So those are two guys that I would potentially look at it and address the midfield position come their pick in the second round.
No, makes sense. And Joe, any thoughts on the Waterdogs, or should we kind of talk cannons to wrap this thing up?
Yeah, I guess the Waterdogs, they got Michael Sowers coming in, which is like the classic Kevin White. They said they got a first round pick, they're not picking in the first round, but they essentially have the number 2 overall pick coming in. So starting the draft on the right foot.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And in terms of the Cannons, they're a team that has the fewest draft picks, and that's because they chose to make some moves. This offseason, they had Jake Fricaro to the midfield. They had Ryan Tierney to this attack. He can also run out of the box as well. I think they could add another midfielder. The fact that Rabel and Busick both retiring, leave some holes there. But Joe, where do you think the Cannons, the former Boston Cannons, kind of go, later in this draft, or kind of maybe their thoughts overall on their offseason moves?
Overall, their offseason moves, right? They've already started their draft. That's why we probably haven't been talking about them too much. Mm-hmm. But they started their draft by trading for Tierney and by trading for Stephen Kelly. Like, I'll kick it back to you. Where do you think Ryan Tierney would go in this class if he was being drafted this year?
This year, yeah, I think he'd probably be in the discussion for a first rounder, late first rounder, maybe even second. So I think what did they trade a second rounder for him, or?
They traded picks 26 and 20, and they got back Tierney and pick 23. So
yeah, so I think it was a great trade for Coach Quirk there. And I think this offense, the more free flowing offense, kind of with Lyle kind of being the center of it, is a better fit for Ryan Tierney overall. So I think we could see him, kind of surge a little bit in this season compared to last year. So yeah, I think that was a great add. I think you mentioned Stephen Kelly. I think that gives them, an upgrade at the face-off stripe. I think Kelly still has some stuff to prove, but bringing in Alex Woodall as well is a great tandem. I think you could make a case that they have a top 3 face-off tandem with those two guys, maybe top 3, top 4, just on, neither of those guys I would maybe rank up in the TD Erlin, Jake Withers, Trevor Baptiste realm, but they've competed against those guys. They've done well against those guys, and you have those two guys now on your roster. It really gives them a different change of pace. So I like that move. What are your thoughts, Brian? Face-off wise, I think they're set. Do you think they add some depth at LSM? Brody Merrill probably only has a couple more seasons in them. They target the defensive end. I don't know. What are your thoughts kind of on the Cannons? Maybe again, not player specific since we don't know who's going to be available at the time, but their needs in the draft.
I don't ever want to assume when Brody Merrill is going to retire, because as of right now, it doesn't seem like he's ever going to. Depth of pole could be a good fit for them. The Cannons were such like an anomaly to me last year. Like they, aside from a few pieces that I think they're addressing with trades, like we're already discussing, I think they had all the pieces to put it together, and I just think that they couldn't figure it out in some cases. There are a couple games that they really had under control, except for like their fast break defense and sometimes they just weren't able to put it together on offense, even though they had one of the more efficient offenses in the league. So I think just having another year together and the additions that they've already had, I think it's hard for me to make a decision about what to address first for them in the draft or how much impact that would have, because I do think that they have a really good team put together. And I think it just lacked a little bit of cohesiveness in year one. So I don't really have an opinion, to be honest.
Yeah, no. And since they are picking in later rounds, it kind of, it's going to be maybe a best player available, situation for them. Well, that wraps up kind of our 8 teams. I'll go around the horn one more time and see you guys any parting thoughts, hot takes, last words you want to get off before we wrap this podcast. We'll start with you, Jake. What are you thinking this draft wise? Any parting takes?
I think it's an exciting class. I think thing about this year is there's a ton of competition to make rosters, right? I mean, rosters are pretty much already set for these guys, so it's gonna be tough to break through. So you've really got to prove yourself in training camp in order to make that 19-man roster come into the season, even for these like first round picks that we're really high on, right? It's like you've got to make a statement to get a spot in this league. And so I think that's great for the future of the sport. Tons of talent to go around, and really excited to see these NCAA championships, to see these guys who stand up in these pressure time situations. And then we're going to see those diamonds in the rough, the Stephen Rafuses picked in the 4th round, and we look back and he should have been a first round pick, right? So who's that guy going to be this year? Is what I always look forward to.
No, definitely. What are your thoughts, Joe?
Yeah, I like that point by Jake. Stephen Rafus, Charlie Bertrand, Jackson Morrow, the list could go on. Like there was, it wasn't just a last year thing. It wasn't just like a Stephen Rafus thing. There were several guys who stepped up. So excited for 32 kids to get their chance. And hopefully the teams find guys who fit their needs that we discussed, and some of these guys can have some great long careers. Excited to see them on the field this summer.
No, absolutely. Especially with all these retirements, getting a little bit of a changing of the guard. A lot of guys, young guys already in the league that are stepping up, but might be some new faces of the league coming in as well. Brian, parting thoughts on this draft?
I'll end the episode with a hot take that's totally unnecessary. I think that Ruvier can just trade away all his 3rd round picks, and I don't even think they have 4th round picks because they don't need them. I think they can trade them for future drafts and take their first 4 picks or so, and I think they're golden for the season. But I don't think that will ever happen, but I would love to see that.
It is interesting. It's hard to kind of discuss some draft day trades that could happen. You could see maybe Rubio does have something up his sleeve. Maybe the Chaos are trying to move up a little bit more, trade back too, because they have 2 first round picks. Definitely interesting to kind of see if we see any draft day trades. So I definitely like that thought process. Last year, I think one that was really exciting for everyone to see unfold was Gobrecht going from the Archers to the Waterdogs, and that proved to be a big trade that made an impact, on both those teams. So yeah, definitely interesting to see. I don't have any hot takes, but I'm definitely excited. I'm excited to watch this live draft too on ESPN. I think it's going to be great to be able to watch it on ESPNU, where we've been able to watch so many college lacrosse games. It's going to be a seamless transition going from watching college lacrosse on ESPN to watching the PLL on ESPN this summer. So certainly looking forward to that. But that's going to do it for us. Reminder that this episode is available on any podcast as well as on YouTube. You can watch on Spotify as well. If you enjoyed it, subscribe, leave us a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify. Thank you, Joe and Jake, for joining us. And thank you guys all for listening to another episode of Pro Lacrosse Talk.